The morning started quietly, like every other. Claire Thompson sat at the edge of her bed, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Her husband Michael had left early for work as usual, same gray suit, same briefcase, same silence. They had been married for 15 years, and though their house still felt full, the warmth between them had slowly thinned, like sunlight fading through fog. Claire didn't remember when things had changed. Maybe after Michael's promotion, when he started working late and answering calls during dinner. Maybe when their daughter moved out for college, leaving the house too quiet, the rooms too still. Or maybe it was Claire herself, lost somewhere between the woman she used to be and the one staring back in the mirror now. That afternoon, she walked across the small suburban neighborhood in Seattle where they lived. The air smelled of rain and pine. She paused at the mailbox, then at the sound of a familiar voice calling her name. "Claire, you forgot your umbrella again." A warm voice said. It was Ethan Parker, their neighbor who lived 2 houses down. He was younger than her by nearly 10 years, a freelance architect who worked from home. Claire smiled, though it was a faint, uncertain smile. "Seems I always do," she said. Ethan walked toward her, holding out her forgotten umbrella with that boyish grin that always carried an easy kind of kindness. "Can't let you melt in the rain," he joked. That line, light and harmless, made her laugh for the first time in weeks. Over the next few days, their conversations became routine. Small talk by the fence, a wave from across the driveway, then longer chats about books, music, and life, things she hadn't talked about in years. Ethan had that rare way of listening, like he was actually hearing her. It wasn't love, not yet. It was attention. And for a woman who had spent years feeling invisible in her own home, attention felt like sunlight on frozen ground. One evening, as the rain beat softly against the windows, Michael called to say he'd be staying late at the office again. Claire didn't even question it anymore. She just hung up, looked around the empty house, and felt the weight of silence pressing against her. That's when her phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Storm's pretty bad. You okay over there?" She stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Yeah, just quiet, that's all." A moment later, another message came through. "You want some company? I just made coffee." Claire hesitated. She looked at the clock, 8:12 p.m. The rain was heavy now, wind whispering through the trees outside. She told herself it was just coffee. Just 2 neighbors keeping each other company while the storm passed. When she stepped into Ethan's house, the warmth hit her immediately. The smell of roasted coffee beans, soft jazz playing in the background, the glow of a single lamp near the couch. It felt lived in, not perfect, but alive. Ethan smiled as she entered. "Glad you made it. Didn't want you sitting alone all evening." They talked for hours. About work, about growing up, about dreams that had somehow gotten smaller with time. She told him about her painting hobby, about how she used to paint sunsets before life got busy. He told her about his travels, the places he wanted to see again someday, at some point. Claire realized how close they were sitting. Their shoulders almost touched. The moment was quiet, not charged, not inappropriate, just as still. Breathless awareness that something inside her was changing. She stood up suddenly, her heart beating faster than she expected. "I should probably get going," she said softly. Ethan nodded but didn't move. His eyes met hers, not demanding, not pulling, just there, steady, gentle. "You're always welcome here, Claire. I mean that." She smiled, though her throat felt tight. "Thank you," she whispered before stepping into the rain again. Back home, she leaned against the door and closed her eyes. She didn't know what she was feeling. Guilt, maybe, but also a strange sense of being seen again. For years, she had been the woman who made dinners, paid bills, listened to updates about meetings she didn't understand. Tonight, for the first time in a long while, she had talked about herself. The next day, everything felt different. When Michael came home, he seemed distant again, distracted by something on his phone. She wanted to tell him about her evening, about how much she missed their old conversations, but the words stuck in her throat. He gave her a quick kiss on the cheek, mumbled something about a late project, and disappeared into his study. Claire sat at the dinner table alone, staring at the untouched food. Days turned into weeks. Her quiet friendship with Ethan deepened. They would meet for coffee, share stories, laugh about trivial things. Nothing physical ever happened, but the emotional pull was undeniable. Every time she saw him, she felt both alive and ashamed. One afternoon, while walking home, she found Ethan waiting by his porch, holding something wrapped in brown paper. "What's that?" she asked. He smiled. "Something for you. You said you used to paint." Inside was a new set of paints and brushes. Her breath caught in her throat. No one had remembered that about her, not even Michael. "I thought maybe you'd like to start again," Ethan said simply. Claire felt tears burn at the corners of her eyes. "You didn't have to. I wanted to," he interrupted softly. That night, she sat in her small home studio, a corner room she hadn't entered in years, and started painting again. Colors flowed across the canvas like she had never stopped. And all the while, she thought of Ethan's quiet smile, his words. The way he made her feel understood. She knew she was walking a dangerous line. There was no denying it. But part of her couldn't pull back anymore. Then, one evening, everything began to shift. Michael came home early. That alone was unusual. He placed his keys on the table and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen in years. Not anger, not suspicion, but curiosity. "You've been smiling more lately," he said quietly. She froze. "Have I?" "Yeah," he said. "It's nice. I just hope, whatever's making you happy, it's not something I should worry about." Claire's breath caught. He wasn't accusing her, but something in his tone told her he felt the distance between them. That night, as she lay awake, her mind raced. She didn't know what hurt more, her longing for Ethan or the guilt she felt toward Michael, who had once been the love of her life. The next day, when she saw Ethan again, something unspoken passed between them. A knowing glance that carried both warmth and warning. "Maybe we should take a break," she whispered. He looked at her with understanding. "If that's what you need." But even as she said the words, she knew her heart was already tangled in something deeper than friendship. And she had no idea that soon everything she had been hiding would come crashing into the open. The following week felt unusually heavy for Claire. The house seemed colder, the days longer, and every sound echoed in the stillness. She had promised herself she would stay away from Ethan, not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much. The line between friendship and something more had blurred, and she could feel her conscience tugging at her heart. Michael, however, barely noticed the change. He was buried in his work again, his evenings spent answering calls or typing late into the night. Claire tried to bridge the gap to start small conversations, but his distracted replies made her retreat further into silence. They had become polite strangers living under the same roof, pretending that routine meant closeness. One rainy afternoon, while rearranging the bookshelf, Claire found an old photo album. The pictures showed her and Michael on their honeymoon, laughing, sunburned, happy. She traced the edge of the photo with her fingers and felt a wave of sadness wash over her. They used to have everything: laughter, hope, dreams. Somewhere along the years, they had simply stopped seeing each other. That evening, as she sat by the window, her phone buzzed again. "How are you holding up?" Her heart tightened. She had deleted their previous chats, hoping to start fresh. But his message pulled her right back into the comfort she had been missing. She typed, then erased her words several times before replying. "I'm fine. Just thinking too much, I guess." A minute later, his reply came. "I miss our talks. They made my days better." Claire stared at the screen. It was simple, harmless even, but the honesty in his words pierced through her. She hadn't heard anyone say something like that to her in years. Without meaning to, she found herself typing back, "Me too." The next morning, she saw him in his yard fixing a loose fence post. She wanted to walk by without stopping, but he looked up and smiled, and something inside her melted. "Morning," he said. "Looks like the rain finally gave us a break." "Yeah," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. There was a pause, not awkward, but full of unspoken words. Then he said quietly, I'm sorry if I made things complicated. That wasn't what I wanted. Claire shook her head. You didn't. I needed to remember who I was again. You helped me do that. He smiled faintly. Then maybe it wasn't all wrong. This was the kind of conversation that lingers, gentle, unfinished. And even though she turned to walk away, she could still feel his eyes on her, kind but full of something deeper. Over the next few days, Claire tried to focus on her life. She started painting again, joined a local art group, and even began cooking new recipes she hadn't tried in years. Michael noticed the small changes, though he didn't know what to make of them. You seem different lately, he said one evening as they sat at dinner. Claire looked up from her plate. Different how? He hesitated, then smiled slightly. Happier, lighter. She wanted to tell him that she had found pieces of herself again, that it wasn't another person giving her happiness, but the courage to rediscover her own life. But she stayed quiet. I guess I'm just trying to do things I love again, she said softly. Michael nodded. That's good. I'm glad. But deep down, Claire could sense something else in his tone. Suspicion, perhaps, or curiosity. It wasn't anger, but it was awareness. He could feel that something had shifted, even if he couldn't name it. One afternoon, Michael came home earlier than usual. He looked around the house, as if noticing for the first time that things had changed. The smell of fresh paint from her art room. The quiet hum of soft music playing from the kitchen. The way Claire moved around with an energy he hadn't seen in years. Who have you been spending time with? He asked casually, though his voice carried a weight that made Claire pause. She turned, surprised. What do you mean? I just mean, you seem to have someone inspiring you again. I don't know if that's good or bad, he said. Claire swallowed hard. I joined a painting group. Maybe that's it. He nodded, but the look in his eyes told her he didn't believe her completely. That night, she couldn't sleep. The guilt began to grow heavier, even if nothing physical had happened. She knew her heart had crossed boundaries she couldn't deny. The next day, she decided to go for a walk to clear her mind. As she passed Ethan's house, she saw him sitting on his porch, sketching something in a notebook. He looked up and smiled, but this time, she didn't return it right away. Ethan, she said quietly, stepping closer. I think we need to stop talking for a while. It's getting too hard. He nodded slowly, though she could see the disappointment in his face. If that's what you need, he said gently. But Claire, I care about you. I hope you know that. I do, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But I can't keep living between two worlds. It's not fair to anyone. She turned to leave, and he didn't stop her. But she could feel his gaze on her back until she disappeared down the street. That evening, Michael came home later than usual. His tie was loose and his eyes looked tired. Tough day, she asked. Always. He sighed, then looked at her intently. Can we talk? Her heart sank. Of course. He hesitated, then said, I know something's been going on, Claire. I don't know what it is exactly, but I feel it. You're distant, distracted. And when you smile, it's not because of me. The words hit her like cold water. Michael, he raised a hand gently. I'm not angry. I just want the truth. Is there someone else? The room fell silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Claire's lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to lie to protect him from the truth and herself from the guilt. But something inside her refused to keep pretending. There's no affair, she said quietly. But yes, there's someone who made me feel seen again. Nothing happened between us, but it made me realize how lonely I've been. Michael didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, staring at the table, his hands clenched together. I thought we were just comfortable, he said finally. I didn't know comfort could turn into distance. Claire felt tears filling her eyes. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I know, he said softly, but it did. That night, they didn't sleep in the same bed. Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had just broken something that could never be fixed. The next morning, she found Michael in the kitchen, already dressed for work. He looked calm but unreadable. I'm not leaving, he said quietly. But we need to figure out what we're doing. We can't keep living like this. She nodded. I agree. He gave her a long look, then added, maybe you should invite him over. Her eyes widened. What? I don't want secrets, he said. If there's anything left to say, let's get it out in the open. I think I deserve that much. Claire didn't answer. Her hands trembled as she poured herself a cup of coffee. She wasn't sure if she was terrified or relieved. Later that afternoon, she stood by the window staring at Ethan's house across the street. Her heart pounded as she thought about what Michael had said. Was this a trap? A test? Or maybe, just maybe, it was his way of confronting the truth without anger. By evening, she made a decision. She would face it. All of it. She walked across the street, knocked on Ethan's door, and when he opened it, she said quietly, we need to talk. All three of us. Ethan's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Claire, what's going on? Michael knows, she said simply, and he wants to talk. He hesitated, then nodded. Okay, if that's what you want. As she turned back toward her house, her heart raced with a mix of dread and strange relief. She didn't know what would happen next, forgiveness, heartbreak, or something in between, but she knew one thing for sure. The truth could no longer stay hidden, and tomorrow night, everything would come out one way or another. The evening arrived faster than Claire expected. The clock seemed louder than usual, ticking through every anxious breath she took. The sun had already slipped behind the rooftops, leaving the sky dim and heavy. Her heart pounded as she arranged 3 cups on the dining table. Unsure if this was a meeting, a confession, or the beginning of something she could never undo. Michael sat silently on the couch, his hands clasped, his eyes distant. He wasn't angry, at least not in the way she feared. But there was something unreadable in his face, a calm born out of deep exhaustion. He had been thinking for days, weighing love against truth, trust against reality. When the doorbell rang, the sound seemed to echo through the entire house. Claire froze for a moment before forcing herself to move. She opened the door, and there stood Ethan, uncertain, nervous, yet still carrying that quiet steadiness that had once made her feel safe. Come in, she said softly. He nodded, stepping into the living room where Michael stood to greet him. For a brief moment, the two men just looked at each other, not with hostility, but with quiet understanding. They both loved the same woman in different ways, and neither wanted to cause pain. Michael gestured toward the chairs. Let's talk, he said simply. The 3 of them sat in silence for a few seconds. The room felt too still, like the air itself was waiting. Finally, Michael spoke. I know about the messages, he began, and the time you've spent together. I've seen it in her eyes. The way she looks alive again. Claire's breath caught. But he didn't look at her, he continued. I want the truth. Not to punish anyone, but because I can't fix something I don't understand. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Michael, nothing happened that you should feel betrayed by. We talked, we shared moments, but it never crossed a line. Michael's expression didn't change. But you care for her. Ethan nodded. Yes, I do. The honesty hung heavy in the room. Claire's heart ached, hearing it spoken aloud. She looked down, unable to meet either of their eyes. Michael sighed deeply. I guess I should have seen it coming. I've been absent for too long, too focused on work, too blind to what was happening right in front of me. Claire finally spoke, her voice trembling. It wasn't about replacing you, Michael. It was about feeling seen again. I didn't plan any of this. I just got lost somewhere between who I was and who I became. Michael looked at her then, really looked at her. And do you still love me, Claire? The question cut through her like a blade. She hesitated, then whispered, yes, but I don't know if love is enough when it feels so distant. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. Maybe I shouldn't have come. This isn't about me. But Michael shook his head. No, you should hear this too. Because whatever happens, this started with all of us. My absence, her loneliness, your timing. There was no anger in his tone, just quiet resignation. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Michael leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe this isn't just about blame. Maybe it's about what comes next. Do we keep pretending everything's fine? Or do we start over, honestly?" Claire looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "What do you mean?" He paused, then said softly, "I mean, if you want to go, I won't stop you. But if you want to stay, we rebuild from the truth, not from guilt." The simplicity of his words hit her harder than any confrontation could have. He wasn't trying to trap her. He was giving her freedom. Ethan spoke quietly. "Claire, whatever you decide, I'll respect it. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted you to feel alive again." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "You did," she whispered. "But now I have to figure out who I want to be when the noise quiets down." Michael stood and walked to the window, staring into the night. "We used to dream about building a life together," he said softly. "Then somewhere along the way, we started just maintaining one. Maybe we forgot that love needs tending." His voice trembled slightly, and for the first time in years, Claire saw the man she had fallen in love with, not the tired husband, not the distant partner, but the man who had once made her laugh under starlit skies. She walked over, standing beside him. "I don't want to lose what we had," she said, "but I can't go back to pretending everything's fine. If we stay, we have to really talk, really listen." Michael turned to her. "Then let's start now." Ethan stood up slowly. "I think that's my cue to leave." Claire looked at him, torn between gratitude and sadness. "Thank you for reminding me what it feels like to be seen," she said softly. He smiled gently. "And thank you for reminding me what real love looks like, even when it's messy." Michael extended his hand toward Ethan, surprising them both. "No hard feelings," he said quietly. Ethan took it, his expression sincere. "None at all." When the door closed behind him, silence filled the house once again. Claire and Michael stood there, uncertain, but together. The tension had eased, replaced by something fragile. Not forgiveness, not yet. But understanding. They sat on the couch, side by side, neither speaking for a long time. Finally, Michael said, "I don't think we can fix this overnight." "No," Claire replied softly. "But maybe we can start by remembering why we mattered to each other in the first place." He nodded. "You know, I used to love how you'd wait for me to come home, even if it was late. You'd fall asleep on the couch just to say goodnight." She smiled faintly. "I stopped because I thought you didn't notice anymore." "I noticed," he said quietly. "I just forgot to say it." The night deepened outside, and though neither of them said the words, a quiet peace began to settle between them. They talked about small things, old memories, their son, their dreams they had shelved. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel cold. Days turned into weeks. They started going for evening walks together again, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They didn't avoid the hard conversations either, about loneliness, fear, and what nearly broke them apart. Ethan moved away a few months later, taking a new job in another city. Before leaving, he sent Claire a simple note. "Sometimes we meet people not to stay with them, but to wake up something inside us. Thank you for being that for me." Claire read it with a bittersweet smile. She didn't reply, but she folded the note and placed it inside her art journal, not as a secret, but as a reminder. One quiet Sunday morning, months after that night, Claire stood in the kitchen, humming as she made coffee. Michael came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, leaning back against him. He kissed the top of her head. "You know, I think we're getting better at this." She laughed softly. "At what?" "At finding each other again." Claire turned around and looked into his eyes. "We're trying," she said, "and maybe that's enough." Outside, the sun streamed through the window, filling the room with soft light. The house that once felt heavy now seemed alive again. Not perfect, but real. They had faced the truth, endured the storm, and somehow, in the middle of all that pain, found a way to start over. As they sat together at the table, sipping coffee and watching the morning unfold, Claire realized something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from forgiving herself, her husband, and even the man who had reminded her what her heart could still feel. Sometimes life doesn't go the way you expect. Sometimes it breaks you open so you can see what really matters. For Claire, that night had changed everything. Not because it ended something, but because it began again in a way that was honest, fragile, and beautifully human. And as she looked at Michael across the table, smiling through the quiet, she knew one truth above all: love doesn't always survive by staying perfect. It survives when two people decide again and again to stay. Claire had always believed that love would be enough. When she married Michael 8 years ago, she thought they were building something lasting, something that would survive time, work, and routine. He was steady, dependable, and kind. He wasn't the type to bring her flowers every week or whisper poetry into her ear, but in the beginning, she didn't need that. What mattered then was his loyalty, his calm nature, and the way he made her feel safe. But as years passed, that same safety began to feel like silence. Their life in Seattle looked perfect to everyone else. They had a cozy white house, 2 cars, a dog named Milo, and a steady rhythm that looked like happiness from a distance. But inside that house, Claire felt something missing, something she couldn't name out loud. Michael was still kind, still reliable, but his eyes no longer searched for her when she entered a room. Their conversations were polite, practical, and short. Did you pay the bills? What time's your meeting? Can you pick up dog food? They were partners in function, but not in feeling. Each morning followed the same pattern. Michael left early for work, leaving a kiss on her forehead, quick, distracted, half-hearted. Claire would stand by the window with her coffee, watching him drive away, feeling a strange mix of love and loneliness. She wasn't angry at him. She was just tired of being invisible. The man who once couldn't stop looking at her now barely noticed when she changed her hair or wore a new dress. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was that he had stopped seeing her. One Saturday morning, Claire woke early, determined to reconnect. She planned breakfast, pancakes, fresh berries, his favorite coffee, and wore the yellow sundress he once loved. When Michael came downstairs, she smiled brightly, hoping for a spark. "Good morning," she said softly. He looked up, smiled faintly, and kissed her cheek. "Morning, honey. Can't stay long. Big project due." Her heart sank. She tried to hide it, nodding as he grabbed his laptop bag. "We were going to walk by the lake today," she reminded him gently. "I know. I'm sorry," he said, already halfway out the door. "Next weekend, I promise." Then the door closed and his car disappeared down the street. Claire stood in the kitchen, staring at the table she'd set for 2. The pancakes grew cold, the coffee lost its steam, and she realized she was waiting for something that wasn't coming back, at least not the way it used to be, later that day. She decided to go for the lake walk alone. The path was quiet except for the soft sound of water and the laughter of children nearby. That's when she heard a familiar voice call her name. Claire. She turned and saw Daniel, her college friend, someone she hadn't seen in almost 10 years. He looked older, but his eyes were still the same, warm, kind, curious. He was jogging, and when he stopped to talk, the conversation felt natural, effortless. They walked together by the lake, talking about everything and nothing. Their old campus days. The professors they used to hate, how life had turned out so differently than they'd expected. Daniel told her about his divorce, how he'd moved back to Seattle to start over. There was something about the way he spoke, open, honest, not afraid to be vulnerable, that made Claire feel seen again. He asked her about her art, something Michael hadn't mentioned in years. "Do you still paint?" he asked. She laughed quietly. "I used to. I guess I ran out of inspiration." Daniel smiled. "You never ran out. You just stopped looking for it." That line stayed with her long after they said goodbye. When she got home, she sat by the window with her cup of tea, thinking about that sentence. Stop looking for it. It wasn't just about painting. It was about everything. She'd stopped looking for joy, for warmth, for herself. That night, when Michael came home, she told him about running into Daniel. He nodded absently, scrolling through his phone. "That's nice," he said, not even looking up. She studied his face, wondering if he even noticed how far apart they'd become. "Do you ever think we've changed?" she asked softly. He finally looked at her, confused. "Changed? What do you mean?" She shook her head and smiled faintly. "Never mind." Days went by, and Claire began to see Daniel more often. Sometimes by accident, sometimes not. He'd wave at her from across the coffee shop, stop to chat in the grocery store, or text her a funny photo from their college days. It started small, innocent, but each conversation made her feel lighter, more alive. For the first time in years, someone was paying attention to her laughter, her thoughts, her dreams. One afternoon, they met for coffee. "You seem different," Daniel said. "More like the Claire I remember." She smiled shyly. "Maybe you're just remembering me wrong." He shook his head. "No, you used to walk into a room and light it up. I'm just glad to see some of that light again." His words hit her in a place she didn't know was still tender. She wanted to tell him how lonely she'd been, how empty her days felt, how invisible she'd become in her own marriage. But she didn't. Instead, she just said, "It's been a long time since someone noticed." That evening, when she got home, Michael was on the couch watching a show. "How was your day?" he asked casually. "Good," she said, sitting beside him. He nodded, eyes still on the screen. The distance between them felt physical now, like an invisible wall neither of them knew how to break. The next week, Daniel called her. "You sounded sad yesterday," he said. "I'm fine," she replied quickly. "Just tired." But he didn't believe her. "Claire, talk to me," he said gently. "You can, you know." And she did. The words poured out her loneliness, her fear of fading, her guilt for feeling empty, even in a stable marriage. Daniel didn't judge. He just listened. When she was done, he said quietly, "You're not wrong for wanting to feel alive. You just forgot that you deserve it." That night, Claire lay in bed beside Michael, staring at the ceiling. His slow breathing beside her felt like a reminder of how separate they'd become. She thought about Daniel's words, "You deserve it." It wasn't about another man. It was about remembering herself. But part of her knew she was standing too close to a line she shouldn't cross. The following Sunday, it rained. The kind of slow, steady rain that makes everything feel softer and sadder. Daniel texted her coffee, just to talk. She hesitated, then typed back, "Okay." She told herself it was harmless. It's just two friends catching up, when she walked into the cafe. Daniel was there, sitting by the window, his face lighting up when he saw her. "You came," he said warmly. She smiled, trying to ignore the way her heart raced. They talked for hours about life, regrets, hope. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was intimate. When they said goodbye, Daniel touched her hand lightly. "You're stronger than you think," he said. Walking home, Claire couldn't stop replaying that moment. It wasn't about the touch. It was about how it made her feel seen. She knew she was standing at a dangerous edge, but for the first time in years, she felt something other than emptiness. That night, she looked at Michael sleeping peacefully beside her and whispered into the dark, "When did we stop being us?" Outside, the rain kept falling, soft and endless, like the ache she carried in her heart. And though she didn't know it yet, that ache was about to change everything. The days after that rainy Sunday felt different for Claire. Something in her had shifted. The gray routine of her marriage seemed heavier, and yet somewhere beneath it, she felt a small spark she hadn't felt in years. A quiet reminder that she was still alive. Daniel's kindness had stirred something she couldn't quite name. She told herself it was friendship, comfort, maybe nostalgia. But deep down, she knew there was more to it. Michael, as always, was busy. His projects at work had doubled, and his late nights became normal. He didn't notice her silence or the faraway look in her eyes. They still had dinner together, still shared the same couch, but the warmth between them was gone. Claire tried to talk to him a few times, but every attempt ended with a polite nod or a distracted, "We'll figure it out." One evening, after another quiet dinner, she walked out onto the porch with a cup of tea. The air smelled like rain again, soft and calm. Her phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "Are you okay? You seemed quiet last time." She hesitated, staring at the screen. Then she typed back, "I'm fine. Just thinking too much, I guess." He replied almost instantly. "You don't have to pretend with me." That message, simple, genuine, broke something inside her. She didn't realize how much she needed to hear that. That night, they talked for hours over the phone. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. They talked about old songs, movies they used to love, the strange ways adulthood changes people. There was nothing inappropriate, just two people remembering what connection felt like. But as they spoke, Claire felt her heart moving toward something she wasn't ready to face. The next morning, Michael left early again. He kissed her on the forehead out of habit and said, "Don't wait up tonight, I'll be late." She nodded, pretending not to care. But when the door closed, the house felt too big, too quiet. She poured herself another cup of coffee and sat by the window, thinking about Daniel. By afternoon, she couldn't resist. She texted him, "Coffee later." He replied, "You read my mind." They met at a small cafe tucked in the corner of downtown, quiet, warm, smelling of cinnamon and roasted beans. When Daniel saw her, he smiled in that way that made her forget the noise around them. "You look lighter," he said. She laughed softly. "Maybe it's the coffee." They talked for hours again, about everything, his new photography work, her half-finished art pieces, the loneliness that hides behind daily life. There was no flirting, no promises, just understanding. But that understanding was dangerous, because it filled the space where her marriage had gone silent. When it started to get dark, Daniel walked her to her car. The street lights glowed softly around them. She turned to say goodbye, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was charged. Daniel finally said, "I don't want to make things complicated for you." "You're not," she said quietly. "You're just reminding me what it's like to feel heard." Smiled sadly. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is," she whispered. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She lay awake thinking about every word, every glance. She wasn't doing anything wrong, at least not yet, but the emotional pull was strong. She knew she should pull back, but she didn't want to. Because for the first time in years, she felt seen, valued, alive. Over the next few weeks, she and Daniel saw each other often. Walks at the park, long talks at the cafe, quiet moments that felt innocent but carried an unspoken weight. She told him about her art again, and he encouraged her to start painting. One day, he brought her a small set of brushes and a canvas. "For when you remember who you are," he said. It was such a simple gift, but it made her tear up. "You don't know how much this means to me," she whispered. "I think I do." He replied softly. That evening, she set up her paints again. The smell of acrylics filled the room, and she felt like herself for the first time in years. When Michael came home, he noticed the easel in the corner. "You're painting again?" he asked, sounding surprised. She nodded. "Yeah, I missed it." He smiled faintly. "That's good." Then he went back to checking his emails. That short exchange made her realize something painful. Michael wasn't cruel or careless. He had just stopped trying. Somewhere along the years, their marriage had turned into a pattern of comfort and silence. And she had accepted it until Daniel reminded her not to. One afternoon, while shopping for groceries, Claire ran into a mutual friend of hers and Michael's. "You two still doing date nights?" The friend asked cheerfully. Claire froze. "Date nights," she repeated. The friend laughed. "You used to do them every month. You made the rest of us jealous?" Claire smiled awkwardly. "Oh, that was a long time ago." That night, she brought it up to Michael. "Remember when we used to go out, just us?" she asked. He looked up from his laptop. "Yeah, that was fun. We should do it again." He hesitated. "Maybe next month?" "Things are crazy at work right now." She tried to hide her disappointment. "Sure," she said softly. After he went to bed, Claire sat alone in the living room. Her phone buzzed. Daniel again. "Still awake?" She stared at the message for a long moment before replying, Yeah, just can't sleep. Want to talk? He asked, and just like that, she found herself on the phone again, laughing quietly, sharing stories. He told her about a trip he wanted to take to the coast, the ocean, the cliffs, the sound of the waves. You'd love it there, he said. It's peaceful. Feels like the world stops for a while. She imagined it, standing by the ocean, the wind in her hair, the sound of waves instead of silence. Maybe someday, she said. Danielle hesitated. Maybe sooner than someday. There was a pause, one filled with meaning they both understood but didn't name. Daniel. She began softly. We shouldn't. I know, he said quickly. I just care about you too, she whispered. That night, Claire cried quietly into her pillow. Not because she had done something wrong, but because she was standing between two versions of herself, the one who had settled for safety and the one who longed for something more. The next morning, Michael noticed her red eyes. You okay? He asked. She nodded. Just didn't sleep well. He smiled faintly. You worry too much. Then he kissed her forehead and left for work. His kiss felt like a habit, not a gesture. And Claire realized she couldn't live on habits anymore. That afternoon, she drove to Daniel's studio, a small, sunlit space filled with photos and canvases. When he saw her, he smiled, surprised. Didn't expect to see you today. I didn't expect to come, she admitted. He offered her coffee. And they talked, but the air between them felt heavier, more fragile. After a long silence, Daniel said, Claire, if this is too much, tell me to stop. She looked at him, her eyes soft but steady. You've done nothing wrong. You've just reminded me what I was missing. Daniel sighed. And that's the problem, isn't it? Because I don't want to be the reason you break something that still matters. Her voice trembled. I don't even know if it does matter anymore. That confession hung in the air. Neither of them moved, but both felt the pull, not just of attraction, but of emotional need, of two people who had spent too long being unseen. Claire stood, tears filling her eyes. I should go, she whispered. Daniel nodded. I'll be here if you need to talk. When she drove home, she could barely see through the blur of tears. The city lights shimmered through the windshield, each one reflecting a question she didn't know how to answer. That night, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at her reflection, tired, older, but somehow softer too. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't keep living halfway. Between truth and longing, as she turned off the light and walked toward the bedroom, she glanced at Michael sleeping soundly, unaware of the storm inside her heart, and for the first time in years, Claire whispered a prayer, not for love, not for forgiveness, but for clarity. Because something had to change, something always does. The days that followed were heavy for Claire. She moved through her home like a shadow, doing all the usual things, cooking, cleaning, smiling when needed. But inside, her heart was full of noise. Every thought pulled her in two directions. One side told her to fix her marriage, to remember the vows she had made. The other whispered that she deserved to feel alive again. Michael stayed the same, polite, calm, but distant. He didn't notice that she barely spoke at dinner or that her laughter was gone again. One night, while he worked late in his office, she stood outside the door listening to the sound of his typing. She realized that even though they lived under the same roof, they had become strangers. The next morning, she sat in her car outside Daniel's studio, gripping the steering wheel. She hadn't planned to go, but her heart had led her there. When he saw her walk in, he put down his camera, his eyes soft but guarded. I wasn't sure you'd come back, he said. I wasn't sure either, she admitted. But I needed to talk. He nodded, waiting. I can't keep doing this, she said quietly. I can't live between two worlds. I feel guilty all the time, even when we're just talking. But I also can't pretend that what I feel isn't real. Daniel took a deep breath. I don't want to hurt you, Claire. You don't owe me anything, but you deserve to be happy wherever that is. She looked at him, tears forming. You've been the only one who made me feel like I mattered. That's not something I can forget. Daniel stepped closer, his voice gentle. Then don't forget. Just make sure that whatever choice you make, it's yours. Those words stayed with her. That night, Claire sat at the kitchen table, staring at the clock. It was almost midnight when Michael walked in. He looked exhausted. "You're still up?" he asked. "I wanted to talk," she said. He set his briefcase down and sat across from her. "About what?" "Us," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "Claire, can this wait until morning? I've had a long day." "No," she said firmly. "It can't." He looked at her, surprised by her tone. "Okay, what's going on?" Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "We don't talk anymore. We don't laugh. We don't even see each other. I keep waiting for something to change, but it never does." Michael frowned. "You think I don't care? I've been working so hard for us." "I know you have," she said softly. "But in all that work, you lost sight of me, of us." He leaned back, silent. "I'm not blaming you," she continued. "I let it happen too. I stopped fighting for what we had. But I can't live like this anymore, like we're just two people sharing a house." Michael looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "Is there someone else?" The question hit her hard. She looked away, unable to lie. "There's someone who reminded me what it's like to be seen." Michael's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "So, that's it? You found someone new?" Tears filled her eyes. "No. I found myself because of him, yes. But this isn't about him. It's about us, or what's left of us." The room was quiet, except for the ticking clock. Finally, Michael said, "I didn't realize how far apart we'd grown." "Neither did I," she whispered. He sighed deeply. "So what now?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "But we need space. I need space." He nodded slowly, his voice heavy. "If that's what you need, I'll give it to you." The next morning, Claire packed a small bag. Michael watched silently as she gathered a few clothes, her paintbrushes, and a sketchbook. When she reached the door, he said quietly, "I never meant to make you feel alone." "I know," she said softly, "and I never stopped caring about you." She left before the tears could fall. Claire rented a small apartment near the lake, quiet, bright, and peaceful. She spent her mornings painting and her evenings walking by the water. The silence that once scared her now felt comforting. She didn't rush to call Daniel. She needed to understand herself first, to see if what she felt for him was real or just a reflection of her emptiness. Weeks passed. She slowly found rhythm in her days. She smiled more, laughed more. She started selling small paintings online, something she hadn't imagined doing before. Her world, though small, began to feel hers again. Then one afternoon, while setting up a canvas, she heard a knock. When she opened the door, Daniel stood there, holding a cup of coffee and a nervous smile. "I wasn't sure if you wanted to see me," he said. "I wasn't sure either," she replied, but she smiled faintly. "Come in." Looked around the small apartment. "You've made it beautiful. It's peaceful," she said. "I needed that." They talked for a while, not about the past, but about life. His new work, her art, small things that made them laugh. When he was about to leave, Daniel turned to her. "You seem free," he said softly. "I think I am," she said, "for the first time in a long time." He nodded, his eyes warm but sad. "I'm glad. You deserve it." She looked at him, realizing something she hadn't before. "You helped me find the strength to change. But now I need to walk the rest of the way alone." Daniel smiled gently. "Then I'll let you." They hugged not as lovers, but as two people grateful for what they had shared. When he left, Claire stood by the window, watching the sunlight touch the lake. For the first time, she didn't feel torn. She felt whole. A few weeks later, Michael called. His voice was calm, softer than she remembered. "I've been thinking a lot," he said. "About us." "So have I," she replied. "I took some time off work," he said. "I realized I've been running from things instead of fixing them. I don't want to lose you, Claire." She hesitated. "I don't want to lose what we were, but I can't go back to how things were." "I don't want that either," he said. "I want to start over if you'll let me." His voice was sincere, and for the first time in years, she heard the man she had fallen in love with. "Maybe we can try," she said softly, but slowly. He agreed. Over the next few months, they met for lunch, went on walks, and talked. Really talked. There were no promises, just effort. Michael listened more, laughed more, and showed up in ways he hadn't before. And Claire, in turn, forgave slowly, letting the walls between them fall one by one. One evening, as they sat by the lake, "The same one near her apartment," Michael said, "you seem different." "I am," she said with a small smile. "I had to lose myself to remember who I was." He nodded thoughtfully. "I think I needed that wake-up call too." The sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky golden. They sat quietly, watching the colors fade. There was no perfect ending, no promises of forever, just two people choosing to try again, wiser than before. Claire still painted, still spent time alone, still cherished her freedom. But she also let Michael back into her world piece by piece. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was real this time, built not on comfort, but on honesty. Months later, she met Daniel again by chance at a small art show. He looked happy, peaceful even. "Your work's beautiful," he said. "Thank you," she replied, smiling. "I owe part of it to you." Kay laughed softly. "Just don't forget the part you did yourself." They talked for a bit, then said goodbye. No sadness, no longing. It's quiet respect. As Claire watched him walk away, she felt nothing but gratitude. He had entered her life when she needed a mirror. And now she had become her own reflection. That night, when she returned home, Michael was waiting with dinner on the table. He grinned. "I tried to cook." "No promises." She laughed, sitting beside him. "I'll take effort over perfection any day." And for the first time in a long time, the house felt warm again, not because everything was fixed, but because both of them had chosen to grow instead of run, as they talked and laughed over the unevenly cooked meal. Claire realized that love wasn't about never breaking. It was about learning how to rebuild together, and sometimes alone first. She had found peace, and now maybe found love again. Not the kind that sweeps you away, but the kind that stays when the storm is over. And in that quiet evening light, Claire finally knew she was home.